Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. In a significant and surprising turn of events, a former senior Department of Justice, DOJ, official who once described the prosecution of former President Donald Trump as vindictive has now come forward to defend the charges against James Comey, the former FBI Director. This surprising shift in stance has caught the attention of both legal experts and political commentators across the nation. The DOJ official, whose name remains anonymous due to the sensitive nature of the conversation, has provided insight into the legal actions involving Comey and their implications for the rule of law. In an exclusive interview, we delve deeper into the reasons behind this shift and explore the broader consequences this case could have on the political and legal landscapes. The charges against Comey, which were filed just days ago, accuse him of making false statements during his testimony before Congress in 2020 and obstructing a congressional investigation. The indictment comes after years of controversy surrounding Comey's role in the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, a matter that has fueled intense partisan divides. In addition to the obstruction of justice allegations, Comey is accused of misleading lawmakers in a manner that impeded the progress of the ongoing investigation. In this report, we examine the context behind these charges, explore the DOJ's actions, and speak to experts who will help us break down the potential implications of this case for Comey, the Trump administration, and the future of American politics. Cut to pre-recorded interview footage with the DOJ official, seated in an office setting. Reporter, addressing the DOJ official. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, your position in the DOJ has always carried significant weight, and your previous comments regarding the prosecution of former President Trump have raised questions. You criticize that case as politically motivated, calling it vindictive. Yet, you've now come forward in defense of the charges against James Comey. Why the change in your perspective? DOJ official. Leaning forward slightly, a look of seriousness crossing his face. Well, I appreciate you asking that question. I think it's important to note that my stance has always been that the law should be applied fairly and impartially to everyone, whether you're the President of the United States or an FBI director. The key here is evidence. In the case of Trump, I believed that the investigation was deeply flawed in its approach and that it was politically motivated from the start. However, when we talk about James Comey, the situation is very different. The charges against him are grounded in the idea that he misled Congress under oath and obstructed a crucial proceeding. These actions are separate from any political discourse and concern the integrity of the judicial process. If the evidence supports these claims, then the charges against him are entirely justified. Reporter looks at the camera, then back to the official. Reporter, that's a fair point. However, critics of the DOJ's decision to move forward with the charges against Comey have argued that the timing of these indictments raises questions. Some have suggested that it could be an act of political retribution, especially in light of the Trump administration's continued attacks on Comey. How do you respond to those concerns? DOJ official. Pauses for a moment, reflecting carefully on the question. I understand why people might view it that way, especially given the polarizing nature of the political climate. But let's be clear, there's a difference between political commentary and the pursuit of justice. Yes, Comey's role in the Russia investigation, which President Trump vehemently opposed, has created a complex backdrop for these charges. But if we take a step back, we need to focus on what these charges are about. Comey's alleged false statements to Congress and his attempt to obstruct the investigation are matters of legal concern, not partisan politics. The timing may be uncomfortable for some, but that doesn't automatically render the charges illegitimate. We cannot afford to disregard the rule of law simply because of the political optics. Reporter. The reporter shifts the focus of the conversation. Let's dive deeper into the charges themselves. As we know, James Comey has been accused of making false statements during his testimony before Congress and obstructing an ongoing investigation. Could you explain in more detail what these charges entail and why they're significant? DOJ official. Leans back slightly, hands clasped in front. The core of these charges centers on Comey's actions during his testimony to Congress in 2020. He allegedly made false statements regarding the unauthorized leaks of classified information. These leaks, as you know, had significant implications, as they involved sensitive national security matters. In addition to the false statements, Comey is accused of impeding the investigation into these leaks by obstructing the efforts to trace the origin of the unauthorized disclosures. When someone in a position of power, especially someone who has held the office of FBI Director, misleads lawmakers and obstructs a federal investigation, it raises serious legal concerns. The consequences of such actions are far-reaching, as they undermine the integrity of the government's investigative processes. Reporter. The reporter nods thoughtfully. So, in your opinion, do you believe that these charges are necessary for the sake of upholding justice, regardless of the individual involved? DOJ official. Clearly determined. Absolutely. The principle here is simple. The law must apply equally to everyone. If someone in a high position of power violates that trust, it is essential that they be held accountable. The DOJ has a duty to pursue justice impartially, without fear or favor. Just because James Comey was once a prominent figure in the FBI doesn't mean he should be immune to the law. If the evidence against him is valid, then these charges are not only justified but necessary to preserve the integrity of our legal system. The camera cuts back to the anchor in the newsroom. Anchor. Thank you for that insight into the charges against James Comey. As the DOJ official pointed out, these charges are about much more than political ramifications. They concern the fundamental principles of justice and accountability. While James Comey continues to maintain that these charges are politically motivated, the DOJ's actions raise important questions about the application of the law to those in positions of power. I can certainly understand why James Comey would feel that way. He's been at the center of a highly charged political and legal battle for years now. It's hard for anyone to be at the epicenter of such intense scrutiny and not feel as though they are being targeted. That said, it's essential that we separate personal feelings from the legal process. The fact remains that the charges against Comey, if proven true, are about specific legal violations, not retaliation for his past actions. Comey's involvement in the Russia investigation and his subsequent firing by President Trump has created an environment where his every move is heavily scrutinized. But at the same time, the law must apply impartially. If there's sufficient evidence to support the charges of making false statements and obstructing an investigation, the DOJ has a responsibility to move forward. The notion that these charges are politically motivated could be seen as an attempt to deflect attention from the substance of the case. That's not how justice works. Reporter pauses, thinking through the official's response. You've mentioned the evidence against Comey. Can you tell us more about what that evidence looks like? What specifically did Comey do that led to these charges, and how does it differ from the political context surrounding the Russia investigation? DOJ official. More animated now. Well, this is where it gets particularly critical. The charges against Comey are not about the Russia investigation itself. They're about his actions during his testimony to Congress. The DOJ's investigation found that Comey made several false statements under oath when asked about the leaking of sensitive information. These were not casual misstatements. They were direct responses to very specific questions asked by lawmakers. In addition, the charges accuse him of obstructing efforts to trace the origin of the leaks, which, as you can imagine, is a serious legal issue when it involves national security. Now, let's be clear. We're not talking about his role in the Russia probe or his public disagreements with President Trump. Those things are political, and they are contentious. What we're talking about here are specific legal actions that may have impeded the course of justice. This is a violation of legal protocols which is entirely different from engaging in a politically driven investigation. Reporter. Turning the conversation toward the broader impact of the case. Given the high-profile nature of the individuals involved, This case has certainly garnered a lot of media attention. What impact do you think this case will have on the future of the DOJ, especially when it comes to handling politically sensitive cases? Do you foresee this case setting a precedent? DOJ official, leaning in with a serious tone. This case is more than just about James Comey or the charges themselves. It's about how the DOJ handles politically sensitive matters moving forward. The Department of Justice has always prided itself on being an independent, apolitical body that pursues justice without regard for political pressures. If this case is seen as a political maneuver, it could severely undermine the public's trust in the integrity of the DOJ.